The Kulturkampf. The Kulturkampf was a campaign that was launched against the Catholic Church in the name of German unity and the upholdment of Enlightenment ideals. The conflict was within and between the German government, with the separation of church and state being at the foremost priority for the control of schools and church appointments. This man on the left is known as Otto von Bismarck. He is the first chancellor of Germany, and he will take kind of a centralist/liberalist point of view, where he thinks that the Catholics have too much power in the southern regions of the German Empire, and he will fight to change that through a war that's known as the Final War of German Unification that was waged with legislation instead of arms. This man on the right, this is Pope Pius IX. He was the Pope at the time during this conflict of the Roman Catholic Church, and he is actually the longest running Pope ever. He reigned for 32 years. He was born on the 13th of May, 1792 in Senigallia, Italy. When he first became Pope, there was a lot of expectations amongst the Italian people that he would lead widespread reform throughout the Papal States and fight for Italian unification. Instead, there was a huge shock as he actually turned to conservatism in favor of being liberal instead, and dismantled the Papal States entirely on September 20th, 1870. Now, another thing he did was establish the First Vatican Council. They believe there have been 3. This was the first of 3. Pius was very adamant about his role as the highest teaching authority in the church, and this would lead to a lot of controversy and tensions later on between him and the German state government. The German Empire sought to restrict and weaken the church for a decade after the Franco-Prussian War, which we will touch on in more detail later. And the German Empire was mainly at this point the state of Prussia, which was Protestant. There were many states within Germany, the state of Prussia being the largest one, and Protestant dominant. So they saw Catholicism as a dangerous influence on their people and started to seek out methods to restrict or eradicate it. More on the First Vatican Council. Pope Pius IX declared papal infallibility with this council. Now, what that means is that the Pope is infallible or unwrong. You cannot argue against him. He is just always correct. He can never fail. He can never lie. He is the one true high teaching power. So he is infallible when teaching faith and morals. His definitions are final and to be undisputed. The Pope also must demand the assent of the entire church on these faith or morality teachings. This doctrine is known by the Latin phrase ex cathedra, which literally means from the chair. As you can see in this image, he is sitting all over all the bishops and cardinals, ruling over them, telling them what to do, what to say. He believes he is the highest teaching authority. Now, theologically, this is based on the belief that the church cannot go wrong in the teachings of Jesus Christ, but the council was suspended the day after the initiative was approved because the Franco-Prussian War broke out in the southern states of the German Empire. A little bit more on Otto von Bismarck. He was born Otto Eduard Leopold von Bismarck in 1815. And in 1847, he married his wife, Johanna von Puttkamer. That same year, he became Lutheran, a denomination of Protestantism. This is important because, as you know, throughout history, Protestants and Catholics have not always gotten along. He was appointed as prime minister by Wilhelm I, I believe he was the first emperor of the German Empire in 1862. And he had a main goal of total German unification. One of the ways he did this was by provoking France into the Franco-Prussian War, hoping that it would help get the southern German states to unify, because the northern German states all unified into Prussia, but he was unable to persuade the southern German states to unify. So eventually, Germany won the Franco-Prussian War, and in 1861, the German Confederacy was established. Bismarck was appointed the Chancellor of this German Confederacy by Wilhelm I. He focused on building a powerful, centralized nation with a unified national identity and specifically targeted the Catholic Church to do so. This led to a lot of rising tensions. The German states were now reconstructed and unified under the Prussian monarchy. The annexation of the Rhineland, which is right over here, if you can see my mouse, it is right along the border of France and Germany, led to rising tensions between the states as its population was majorly French and Catholic. So there was a huge population of Catholics throughout all of these southern states. All of this blue is things that are united under Prussia, and all of these things in the south are southern states of the German Reich that are majorly French, Polish, or Catholic, or all three. Prussians were despised in the Rhineland because they were associated with Protestantism, and other places, throughout the empire, French and Polish people were despised because they were associated with Catholicism. There were a lot of complaints that the French Catholic Church held too much control, and anti-Catholic laws began passing in the Landtag, which is known as the Prussian Parliament. These laws would only affect the state of Prussia when they were passed. However, Prussia covered, and I meant to capitalize that, Prussia covered the majority of the northern part of Germany, and much of the legislation would be quickly copied into all of these other German states to the south. Now, in the fall of 1872, Prussia's Minister of Worship, Adalbert Falk, began introducing anti-Catholic bills into the Prussian Landtag. These bills called for a number of things, including German citizens approved by the Prussian government could serve as priests in Prussia. Seminaries needed to become under state control. Religious services had to be spoken in German, even in Polish and French-speaking areas. Some of the laws initially violated the Prussian constitution, but what the Adalbert Falk and other Landtag members of, I'm not quite sure what they're called, changed this by simply changing the constitution. Now, Otto von Bismarck was very anxious to strengthen the central power of the German Empire, and so he issued these in May of 1873, and they were henceforth known as the May Decrees. Now, eventually, needing Catholic support in the Rhineland, or the Reichstag, Bismarck began repealing many of these anti-church, anti-Catholic May decrees later on in his reign, as there was a huge revolution against it. Very famously, one more note on this, very famously in the Prussian Landtag, when these were being passed and being announced, a liberal member stood up and announced that this was a Kulturkampf, or an attack on culture, an attack on the state, an attack on the way of being of Germans. Now, what was the impact of this? In February 5th, 1875, Pope Pius IX, I'm not quite sure why that says the 11th there, declared Catholics could freely disobey the May laws. So essentially what he did is said, if you're Catholic, you can disobey whatever the Prussian government is telling you to because it is an infringement on your freedom of religion. And since he had that idea of from the chair saying, I am the one who teaches you what to do, and I can say, you can do whatever I say because I am the final say, that was his justification for saying Catholics could do whatever and disobey these laws. So Prussian bishops followed him and continued to oppose the government. The government then in turn fined bishops, and then bishops responded by refusing to pay those fines. When the government forcibly collected the fines, the bishops still refused to go along with the May laws. This led to a lot of exile, a lot of prison time. By 1877, every Prussian bishop, along with hundreds of priests, were either in exile or in prison. Tens of thousands of Catholics were left without the sacraments and the ministry of the church. Catholics in every single state of the German Empire began to protest and rise against the May decrees, and by 1877, leading to a lot of repeals of these laws, as Otto von Bismarck realized we'd gone too far. He honestly personally got way more out of it than he initially wanted. There began this rise of this center party that wasn't quite liberal and that wasn't quite conservative, that just did not like Bismarck and did not agree with anything that he was doing, and that really worried Bismarck. So he began negotiating some peace laws after the death of Pope Pius IX in 1878 with his successor, Pope Leo XII. In February of 1880, the Vatican suddenly and kind of shockingly agreed to a civic registry of all clerics, which meant that they were kind of saying okay, yes, we will register and make sure that all of our clerics are German citizens. And then for the next 7 years, laws were slowly introduced, undoing the May decrees up until May of 1887, up to 14 years after they were initially instituted. On the 23rd of May, 1887, the Pope declared that the struggle which damaged the church was of no good to the state and is now over. The peace laws restored the inner autonomy of the Catholic Church while also leaving laws supporting the separation of church and state in place. Like, for example, there was a lot of laws that remained in place about Catholicism's and Protestantism's place in education. Now, the modern Kulturkampf. In modern political usage, the German term Kulturkampf describes any conflict, political, ideological, social, between the secular government and the religious authorities of a society. The term also describes the great and small culture wars among political factions who hold deeply opposing values and beliefs within a nation, a community, and a cultural group. Some examples of this are within Israel. Obviously, Israel is a nation state that is founded on the basis of Judaism, and there has been a law of their history where the church bleeds quite heavily into the state. Another example there's been a few instances in the United States. Even today, there is, you could argue, a Kulturkampf between the church's involvement in the state, with maybe some schools being required to have morning prayer in Texas, for example. And yeah, these are my sources. Thank you.